So I didn't deck out an agenda because we're kind of at a standstill with several projects as SaltStack is doing their own thing in the background, and I'm coordinating with that. But more or less, we got to let those background things get done before we can do anything really exciting here in our documentation working group. So at the moment, I'm open to anything we want to talk about. If anyone has suggestions or clarifications they need.
So there's a couple of things I'm also working on in the background that I'm teeing up to be able to work on more in the future. But my current assignment on the issue board is to work on a contribution style guide for the documentation. And so that's probably going to take a little bit to like that might take until June to get something like that the way I would like to get it. But what I'm probably going to do is at least take a much closer look at the style guide that we have right now and make existing revisions to that when I'm not crazy swamped with normal SaltStack Enterprise work. So that's on my radar and I'm working on that. I'm just making very slow progress on it. But I did want to mention that one of the things the Docs team has thought about doing, not this year, but the next, is possibly putting in an application to the Season of Docs program by Google, which the way Season of Docs works is you submit your project, your open source project to Google, a committee reviews it, and they pick the most promising open source projects that they want to support, and then pair that with a professional technical writer who will help improve the documentation for the project. And you do have to pay them a stipend to do that. What I've been doing these last couple of weeks is forming alliances with the actual people on the Good Docs project who run that program. And so I'm helping with some of their open source projects that they're working on. For example, one of the projects they're working on is called the Good Docs project, which is all about creating templates for open source projects. They've got some beta templates out right now, and the idea is that they can provide these templates to open source communities that can then be plugged into a project, and you can use that base template to form the basis of some good documentation. So what I'm going to be doing with them is kind of contributing a few templates to their project and taking some for our project as a way to kind of just lift the quality of the open source documentation in general. So I'm sorry that that's kind of more about building political alliances right now than doing actual work, but that's what I've been working on.
That's cool. Sweet. Let me know how it goes. With Bryce, have you migrated over all of the repositories that are related to documentation yet? I know you had some password scrubbing to do.
I've done about half of them. I haven't done anything with passwords. I'm waiting on marketing to change the password. They said that they have a lot on their plate, and what's the priority? I said, can we get it done this week? And they said probably.
Okay, cool. I'm interested in. We've kind of talked tangentially in the past about whether PDFs are still required for air gap, and I had voiced an idea to just package the whole website to be ran on someone's local laptop if they're in an air gap environment. I think I'm going to explore that over the next month and try to refine that and see if I can make an easy foolproof model. Because I talked to some other programmers and other projects, and they're like, well, you could do this, could do that. There's a half dozen ideas, and so I wanted to find the one that I think is easiest to deploy, as in like give to somebody to use, and also works across obviously all the different computer operating systems. So I'm going to work on that, I think, for the next month to try to give a proof of concept, proof of value that like you really can have air gap non-PDF documentation. And because at the point, really, if it's not a proven technology or a proven easy way to give to somebody, as easy as giving them PDF, then people are always going to be reserved and scared of leaving the PDF frontier.
So another thing we'll have to look into is right now for search, we just use Google custom search engine,
Yeah.
and we have the built-in Sphinx stuff disabled. If someone has a PDF, they could easily search it, but if they have the HTML documentation, that becomes a bit more difficult because there's multiple pages. So we should, if we're going to have HTML, we should get that search working.
Yeah. Yep. And that was one of the concerns that I need to figure out. So yeah, that's the project I've kind of self-assigned for me, and hope that's effective. And then I'll present that, and we'll see what y'all think. Anything else from you guys? Like any projects you've been working on tangentially related to docs?
Yeah, I can throw out my test clinic stream that I've started doing on Twitch. I don't know if you've seen any of Tyler's streams he's been doing, but he's been doing some triage work and then some of the pop stuff on Twitch. And I just started joining the crew, just writing tests and showing people how to write tests on
Cool.
against salt. So as I've been doing that, I was just looking, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I need to get to this whole test documentation improvement. So that's I'll invest some time here in the next couple of days to on that and see if I can get something a solid improvement there. So
okay, sweet. Something that we can discuss over the next couple of weeks while we're again letting just backend and other related projects run their course is talk about like the topology of the documentation. I know that Elisa, you were interested in changing that, and I am too, because right now we kind of have inline state module documentation, then inline execution module documentation, and then there's a good sporadic cover of other modules and all that, and then finally we have like another branch that is just like non-inline documentation. And obviously I don't think the state and execution module documentation is going to change or how that's structured, because it works well, it makes sense. But for the non-inline documentation, we can definitely reorganize that as we're throwing out and refreshing new stuff. We could definitely discuss that into something that we think makes sense for both beginners and experts to navigate quickly.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So I think what I'll do is I'll make a little issue on the Arduino Docs Hub, and then connect that to an open. I don't know yet. I was thinking I was gonna put like some kind of diagram that's open to all of us on there, but I don't actually know how effective that would be, since, yeah. So I don't know. We'll talk about maybe there's an easy way to do that, but more or less my idea is to make a visual diagram to represent how we want that documentation topology to look like, so everyone's on the same page when we start ripping out stuff and recoding it in. But I think that's the easiest thing for us to work on while trying not to step on toes of, moving to GitLab and changing how our CI/CD pipeline works and all that. That being said, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's directly related to our group that we can work on at the moment. Obviously, we have plenty of just open issues that we can work on as is. I've been doing that. I recently, was it you, Bryce, that we were chatting about that the way to put into PRs into the documentation had changed, because I was used to the old method where it had said back in like 2019.2 to you go back 2 versions, and that's the one you PR to.
Yeah, so now the way we do things is everything goes into master except for CVE releases or extreme bugs that make it so Salt doesn't even start up.
Okay.
Is what I'm aware of.
Okay.
So for documentation, it should basically be everything goes into master.
So does that mean more or less that we're vetting the atmosphere for all the other older versions of documentation, even if the update changes something from back then?
Yeah, so even if something changes for back then, at least
based on what I've heard from the open team, is everything goes into master. The docs are part of the release. If something's released, it's released.
Okay. Does that mean, do we even care then anymore about trying to somehow pipeline and maintain older documentation? Because if we're no longer making corrections to documentation like to 2017 version, that means that that doc shouldn't be relied upon at all, even if you're running that version.
I keep the pipelines running daily just in case we have a CVE release. So it's just a easy, we know they still work, no problems.
Okay.
That's the only reason I have them running daily.
Okay. Interesting. I mean, that makes it easier to understand how to contribute, so that's fun. So for all of you out there, if you think contributing was a pain, it's became easier. And we encourage you to contribute more.
Yep.
Did anything change in the style guide, Elisa? I know that you posted that to.
No.
No. Okay.
Nope, I have not changed it, and I have an open task to look at it more carefully that I have not gotten to.
That's fine.
On the understanding that my next 2 weeks are going to be my busiest 2 weeks, and after that I will be a little bit more free. Is there anything that is blocking you, Alan? You mentioned a couple of blockers that are on the SSE side, or on the SaltStack side, I should say. Are there any blockers that I can help with?
At the moment, I don't think so. It's more or less like I've exhausted every avenue I can to help. And like, I'm at the point now where I just need to literally give other people time to do what they got to get done without me harassing them constantly. So trying to relax and like, it's okay, you know. That being said, we are in a slow period. So I'm considering, instead of our next documentation meetup being in 2 weeks, we can do it like everyone else in a month, just because we need time to pass.
Yeah, I could see that. I'd be in favor of that, because I don't know if there's a lot that I will be able to get done in 2 weeks, given my schedule. But I would love to meet again eventually and get this back on my radar and start working on some tasks.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. And also, if Bryce, Ken, any of you need some help or would love me to help on something, I'm more than happy to help. So for the most part, I'm just working on SSE stuff and working on comprehending your guys's, continuing to comprehend on GitLab stuff. I've used it in the past, but never like so fully. So I got to get used to how it does everything. It doesn't look like it's that complicated. I just have to actually drink some coffee and stare long enough. So, all right.
Oh, I'm just hoping, like, do you want to talk about topology today, since we do have some free time and I'm here and that we could talk about it, or is it too premature to talk about that?
I was going to go ahead and, do we have a graph of some sort that represents the topology that exists now for the documentation, the way it's structured? Because I would like to start from a conversation that has that already here, and then talk about moving around the pieces. That way it's nobody's ever losing track.
I doubt that exists currently. Yeah, probably it was much more of a hive mind effort where things just organically happened and the documentation emerged. It wasn't necessarily being directed by a content strategy of any kind.
Okay. Yeah. So no, I'll table that for now. Let me make a graphic. I think I'll also pull in Rhett and other people from over there and take their pages and also add that into the graphic, so we can clearly see where documentation does exist or tangentially related documentation exists and how they're all connected. And then that way, when we're moving pieces around, like, we still feel like we have a good visual of the whole picture while we're focused on our bit that's just for us.
Can I ask, are you going to incorporate anything like personas or audience analyses in your creation of this? Like, because that's a big part of it, is just understanding who is the audience, what is the audience experience, what's the user story for the particular documentation. and thinking through those kinds of issues. So I would, maybe you are or you're not considering that, but I would say maybe make that a component, thinking about who is going to read the document, why, at what stage are they at with their experience with SALT, and what do they come to the documentation for?
Yeah, I think the way I'm looking at this is, again, I'll make a simple topology graphic that represents everything where content is, and then I'll make copied overlays that show different pieces in different lights. So like one will just show like what pieces are coming from what repo. Another one will show like this is part of the OpenSalt's prerogative, and this is part of tech writers on the back end. And then I'll show another one that's like, all right, this is where beginners usually are having trouble, and this is where experts are asking for more content. And so I'll just, start doing some project management of showing like where the content can be fleshed out in different overlays.
That sounds cool.
Yeah.
Very good.
So,
Just wanted to make sure the audience was part of the topology. That's all.
Yes. My main two concerns is easiest flow for tech writers to be able to write to, because if you pick a certain set of topics and like they make sense as like an audience member, but they don't make sense for how a tech writer is writing from one to another, you're going to find some choppiness, and then people are like, I just got whiplash going from one topic to another. And then at the same time, you don't want it to be just how tech writers like to flow, because usually that's like developing in a void, and therefore the user is going to get lost because there was assumptions made that weren't accounted for the user.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that all sounds great. Thanks for doing that, Alan.
Yeah. I think that's all I have for you guys today. This is a pretty short documentation meetup, but I'm okay with that because we've been pretty progressive on multiple fronts and in our past meetings. So it's okay to have a slow one once in a while.
And I did have some things I wanted to just mention that I noticed after the last meeting that one this that PR that I was working on with the link fixes.
Yeah.
I had not contributed to the SALT Open before, and I totally implemented the GPG signing thing wrong. And I'm gonna have to redo certain things because after I started merging master, catching that branch up,
yeah,
to retroactively rebase and then re-sign old commits when it's nested in all these merges is like a nightmare scenario. And so it's like, well, I wanted to kind of make the link fixing tool more efficient anyway. So I might be resubmitting that PR and link to that PR.
Right.
But outside of that though, when I was looking at how the docs are generated from the doc strings of the SALT modules, I noticed that, and it sounds like this is kind of a known thing, is there doesn't seem to be a standard way of formatting doc strings for modules and the like in them. So then when they actually get taken by Sphinx and get formatted in the documentation, depending on the module you're looking at, their documentation looks entirely different. Some are documenting the parameters. Some document the parameters in a different way, so it gets formatted weird on the page. And I didn't know if maybe that would be something that also is in line with the style guide, and if it would be something that would be included as, hey, did we want to use the Google developer style guide when it comes to doc strings, or did we want to do this? But then also SALT has this interesting feature where a lot of these modules are going to be broken off into their own outside of core. And so then would these kind of standards be aligned with more like whatever the future chosen core modules would be? And anyway, just kind of some thoughts that I had and some things that I'd seen when looking at the documentation.
Yeah, a few things on that. One specific to, maybe not specific to your PR, but one of these PRs we just recently had. We acknowledge that some of the URLs don't need to be checked by Sphinx because they are literally example.com, or some of the redirects are correct and you don't want to actually change those. I did see that in one of the configuration files for Sphinx that we had a Python list, I believe, that just was adding ignore these. I was considering if maybe we should break that out into its own file, and it's just an a list file that's imported into Python for there. That'll help make that file a bit smaller and more condensed to just logic. And then those variables, it's easy to add to that because you're like, that's where that goes. I don't know if anyone cares about that or not, but I tend to do that with, like, for example, Docker. If I have to make a new Docker file, I'll have my APK dependencies and my pip dependencies imported into it rather than having it inline. That way all the logic's much more condensed and then the dependencies are separated. And it's kind of thinking the same thing when it came to exemptions from the Sphinx checker for the URL.
I really like that idea too of keeping it in its own separate, kind of like, I don't know what you call that, like a link ignore file or something.
Yeah, and I think if we do that, what I'd want to do is make it that people can still go ahead and just add into the regular listen file, because like they might not know to go put it there, and then that's like fine. We like accept that you can do that, and then once in a while we just take those extra few URLs and add them back into that file to help keep it clean. That way it's easy for people to keep contributing, but also at the same time we have a good place to just like, these are what we care about. This is a special list, and it's just for this one thing.
So I want to comment on the API reference stuff. Let me at least qualify my statement before I begin, which is that I am not an expert on API reference modules. So bear that in mind as I'm talking. But this Good Docs project that I've been recently involved in, they do have a template for API reference documentation. I wonder if we could take that base template that they've provided, modify it for what SALT needs, and then add that to a style guide. And then at some point in the future, maybe November, go through and get all of our API documentation to conform to the same template, and make sure that we are providing that template to open source contributors, and that it's easily accessible so that we can have standardized modules, and just make sure it's all audited. But again, I understand that that's a huge ask and a big task, but it might be a good method of approaching this.
Yeah, I was thinking along similar lines. Originally, I was balking at making these standardizations and changing them because I wanted to know what the new theme and the subsequent syntax that goes with it would be. Seeing as though that timeline has come out, that's like November is when we're considering doing that. Maybe, you know, keeping that on the back rack actually isn't a good idea, and we can go do it now, that standardization. So I'm okay. I think I'm okay with that. Yeah. Now that the timeline seems much more stretched than I realized, I was thinking maybe a couple of months before that that theme would be available for us to start toying with, and then I would have pushed the conversation for that. But since it's like, you know, a half a year out, then yeah, I think I'm fine with that.
Well, the theme is not going to be half a year out. It's mostly just, will the tech writers have cycles to give to open source? Not like that. That's kind of what the bigger issue is. But like the theme should be available soon for you to play around with. Am I right, Derek? Is this like a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it'd be available pretty soon with the advances that are being done on like the overrides that were recently have been tested out. And I think once we add more documentation and see as we progress with the install guide, the SSE one, we'll have an idea of, okay, then this is kind of the MVP of the theme configuration overrides that can be tested and used pretty easily. Well, I mean, easy to apply and then test how conflicting it is. But yeah, I think, I don't know, I'll keep you up to date too, based on when, because we're still like applying some fixes here and there. And as an update to that though, we actually found that as we've run into certain issues with the theme in particular, like the base theme that we're applying overrides to, I've been able to raise issues in like the GitHub open source material theme for Sphinx when it seemed like, hey, this seems more like a bug than a like skinning problem. And they've been incredibly responsive and have like fixed two of my issues that I have raised already with them to update and fix the theme so that we won't have to like make override files as like temporary workarounds. and I'm going to continue that path too, so that as things progress, it'd be like, okay, here's the latest theme that we're using that includes those bug fixes, and which is like in PyPy already too. So it's like a simple inclusion in the requirements file, or however way that the docs would be referencing. Yeah, because I saw how there's the nested requirements files in Salt Open, and yeah, so it's going to be a little bit more time. But the cool thing is that bugs are being fixed at the lowest level, so that we're not having to add a bunch of weird code we have to later tweak or remove.
Awesome. All right.
If I were to
Awesome.
look in my crystal ball and tell you when that theme might be available and in a stable place, I would tell you 2 weeks. Maybe it would be more than that, but that's what my crystal ball would say right now. So
Well, if that's the case, then yes, we can definitely start working on the standardization. Maybe preliminarily start scrubbing just things that we already know we don't want, and then maybe some of the big, as we get more and more of the module inline documentation to be conformed, it'll be easier to then make any mass changes programmatically that to get it to fit the template. That being said, if we're going to have that conversation, we need to include two things. We need to balance two things, and I don't know how best to do this. That balancing is like what we want it to look like, and what's required and what's optional, and then also, is that too difficult or too much to ask? Because like I'm sure everyone here knows that, like, you guys require tests now to do module any kind of module changes or adding a new module. And everyone agrees that's a great idea because it makes it a lot, you're trying to take away more work hours from the human beings and just make the computers do the checks for you. And that's awesome. That also means that automatically like half of the internet hates you, right? Because they're like, how dare you? I just wanted to give you the code and that's it. I think that we need to keep in mind that like those that are still doing that, they're like, okay, I'll write you a test that makes sense. That's great. But they're probably also going to balk if we have too many stringent requirements for the documentation. And so there's going to need to be a balance there where we're okay with these slightly imperfected things, and we'll either adjust them ourselves or accept that. So I want to keep that in mind, because we can make a really beautiful template and like just absolutely perfect. But if it's too stringent, then everyone's going to say, you know what, that's more than it's worth. And so we need to keep that in mind so that people are happy to contribute still.
that's totally fair. I like that.
Okay.
And I think, to that point, it also might be a good idea for us to say, hey, and make this just generally known and available to contributors for SALT. Like, we understand that documentation writing is not everybody's strong suit, and that some people just simply flat out don't care. Great thing. That's why we're part of a community, because some people really care and embrace like good documentation. So if you don't want to write documentation, but you still want to contribute to SALT, awesome. Here's how you get in contact with the Ducks team, and you can come and say, here's what I'm doing. Can you guys document this? Because I don't really care. And we'll say, yeah, great. Let's document that so that people can, and that way it's more of a, team effort, and we're not just like saying, okay, well, you've got to contribute everything and make it just absolutely perfect. But we can say, we'll take whatever contribution you want to make, and then we'll, as a community, we'll build on it and make it better.
I really like that too. I want to find a way for us to be able to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
A stopgap between those two extremes of like no help at all and being able to get ample amounts of help is that I'm out of focus. There we go. So as we are conforming all of I can't talk today, all the inline documentation, as we are conforming that and getting it to more stable, there will no doubt be examples where they can't fit perfectly because of the uniqueness of whatever that module is. Like these certain parameters can't be done this way because it's more complex than standard parameter, and so on and so forth. When that happens, we'll make decisions and say, all right, this is the second standard because of the uniqueness. At some point, I have no doubt we'll have like 5 or 6 variations on like what's an acceptable inline doc. We can take an example of each one of those, scrub it, and then make a page of here's your copy and paste for your inline docs for your functions and modules. And that will also help users because then they already have a template format for their inline docs and they just have to fill it out. And since we're providing that template, even if their content sucks, right? Like they just have horrible, expression or whatever, it'll at least programmatically fit right. And we can make the adjustments to the content, whether that's grammatical changes or someone didn't quite understand how to tell the full capacity of their module and so on and so forth. Another thing is we also have to recognize, actually, did we ever decide how we were going to add examples for those modules? Because right now we understand how to do that in the upcoming theme, where we're expecting a button of some sort, and you can have multiple beginner to expert complex examples. But I know somebody voiced it, and I agree with them, that it's way too difficult to just, or it's too much to just add in huge amounts of docs that is just example upon example. So I don't think we bridged the gap of how are we going to have a separate file that is imported into the indocs string, or are we okay with those modules just having huge amounts of documentation written in them? I'm not, because in terminal it's automatically useless when I show me doc string for this module and just be explosive with examples. And so we really need to think about that, because I think that adds a lot of complexity on the GitHub side of it, the way that we look at how our docs are managed and the files are managed. But it's something that we do want, because it fixes a lot of the problems with the documentation as it's presented on the website. I don't have a solution at the moment. The easiest one I had was you literally have an import file that's expanded documentation for every module, but that also sounds like a pain. So I'm open to suggestions. We don't have to go through that right now, but over the next month while we're not meeting, if anyone does come across something that they think was a good solution, or something that we can steal and rework to make it a good solution, please keep that in mind. I would love to hear it.
This sounds like the kind of research project that would be really good for me to take on, maybe as a professional goal or something like that. So I'd be willing to volunteer what are the best practices in the tech writing industry for how to handle the need for examples and API reference, and how to make it scale. So yeah,
Okay.
I'll start, I'll make that an actual formal goal for myself, I think, over the next release cycle, because it sounds like a good candidate.
I accept that, but you are going to be quite busy over the next couple of weeks. So everyone else.
I'm talking about a 4-month span.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. But yeah, so if we're getting the theme, that's going to come up quickly, because a lot of us holding off actually making new content was let's get the back end set up, and then let's get the tools needed to add in that content effectively. And if we are getting all of that, yeah, we're hitting that point. So in a sense, now we're getting to the point where rubber meets the road, and we actually have to do all the things we were promising and thinking we can do, which is exciting in my opinion.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Anything else, guys? He's like, I can't take any more.
No more docs.
All right. Well, then that's the end of this installment of the documentation working group, and everyone enjoy the rest of your work day, I guess.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. See ya.
Bye.